Hey, geography students, this is Mr. Tronson, and today we are going to be looking at the differences between nations and states. There's a number of ways to break down the difference between a nation and a state. The one thing that I will say is we begin our understanding of states, don't think of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin as states for this perspective. I want you to think worldwide, and states are going to be a way of describing a land or in the world. That's, I guess, the best way to start this off. So just remove that definition of state from the United States and learn something new here today. Would all of you please make sure that you have your Unit 4 questions out? Please make sure that you have those. So split your screen at this time. If you haven't done so, please do so now. My presentation will be on one side, and your Unit 4 questions will be on the other. All right, if you need to pause the video for any more time, go ahead. But otherwise, let's get started. Here we go. First off, the definition of a state. According to geography, a state is a body of people living in a defined space with the power to make and enforce laws and with an organization to enforce those laws. So, in other words, the word state really is a country. And so, we're going to really focus in on these words here, okay? If we are describing the country of Germany, for example, we can also call it a state. But to have a state, though, there has to be certain things in place. So we're going to break that down here in just a second. But again, make sure you define what a state is. A body of people living in a defined space with the power to make and enforce laws and an organization to do it. Here we go, number 2. So if we call something a state, it has to have these 4 things in place. If you are a state, you have sovereignty. That's number 1. Number 2, you have territory. Number 3, you have population. And number 4, you have a government. So these are essential. If you will call something a state, they must have these 4 things. Okay, so we're going to help you figure out why Minnesota would not be worldwide, internationally, be considered a state. And we'll start with population. So the group of people who are the citizens or members of a state, they make up that population. Now, how do you know? It's because of your address. How do you know? It's also because of the citizenship that you claim. Now, yes, there is a rare case that there are some people who have dual citizenship, but for the most part, if you are a citizen of an area, if you have an address and you are a citizen, you will be considered counted toward the population of that state. Now, the population of a state has a variety of features. Population sizes can vary from state to state. Whether they live in urban or rural areas can absolutely vary. There are some areas of the world where we know this based on our agricultural unit. There are some states that have a very large population of farmers, and some areas have a very small percentage. We have economic situations that vary, and that is also a way to define a population. You have different levels of education. It's another way of separating the people in a state. And a population can be broken down through the cultural traditions, languages, religions that they observe. All of those things could fall in a way that we can break down a population, that we are able to separate what makes one population different from another and what makes a population inside of a country different among itself. So first thing you have to have, if you are a state, you got to have a population. That's one, right? So we're going to give you a chance to describe your population. And what we mean by that is we'll get to it here actually tomorrow in class. Second, sovereignty. If you are a state, you must have sovereignty. So I'm going to pull all of this down. The ability of a state to control its internal and external affairs. That is why Minnesota is not considered a state internationally, because it does not control its internal and external affairs. If Canada, for example, was to invade from northern Minnesota, you wouldn't just have the Minnesota National Guard going out there. The U.S. Army, Air Force, Marines, they would be the ones who would be sent out. It would not just be the Minnesota National Guard. And because we don't have the power to just govern our own borders, we are not a state in the eyes of the world. Right? So again, when we're using that term state, I want you to think about it from an international perspective. So the key part, and we have put this in red bold. It is complete independence. Let me try to give this to you in an example that you guys understand. In your home right now, in the family that you live in, are you free to leave and come back whenever you want? Can you leave the house whenever you want? Can you come back whenever you want? Are you able to use any sort of language, act any sort of way, do anything you want in your house right now? If you don't have sovereignty, because sovereignty is complete independence. Now, when will you receive sovereignty? Most likely when you move out of your house. Think about it. Right now, could you go out until 4 a.m. and then go to Perkins and have breakfast till 6 a.m. and then stay awake to watch the sunrise and then not deal with anything at home? And would this be able to happen day after day, month after month, year after year? Would there never be a discussion? I am assuming that almost all of you, it should probably be all of you, will go, no, I don't have complete sovereignty. I don't have complete independence. You don't have the power to do whatever it is that you want. A state, it's the same thing, is that until they have the power to make laws, shape foreign policy, and own their own course of action, that means that they are responsible for what happens. If you don't have that, you don't have sovereignty. And if you don't have sovereignty, you are not considered a state. So, by the way, just to make sure you guys are clear, if we see sovereign, it means to rule, right? To have your own control. And again, just that word reign, it means to rule. Just so that you guys all know. Reign means to rule. All right, next. So we'll get to that next, or that stuff we'll get to tomorrow. Government. All right, so what does it mean for government? It is an organization inside a state that controls the actions and policies of that state. So consider the country of South Africa a state, the state of South Africa. So they have a government in place. It's in Pistoia, all right? And in that country's capital city, they have a government that makes laws, that will set up a military that can protect the state if some foreign invader comes in. They have um, organizations in place that help maintain order, whether that is a local police, whether that is um, uh, just a neighborhood watch, but they have something in place, and they provide services to its people. So that might be social security, that might be welfare, that might be allowing housing for certain groups of people that qualify, but services in place, improving roads, unemployment payments, whatever. But the government will provide those types of services and more to its people. So those are the four main roles that a government plays in a state. Remember, this is the third of four things that you must have in place if you are a state. We get to number four, and that is a territory. So when we talk about territory, we're talking about this. It is an area in which a state's rules apply. If you think about it, the state of Minnesota, sorry, I'm not doing that. Sorry, my apologies. The state of Canada, right? I want to stick to the international definition here. So if we're talking about Canada, Canada has rules that are different from the United States. Okay. When it comes to who can drive, if you can go to a bar, if you can rent a car, whatever it might be, those rules fall within a territory. Once you go out of that territory and go into a new one, rules are different. So there must be set boundaries that are established. That's why international borders are so important, because as you move from international boundary to international boundary, the countries are different and the rules are different. And boundaries, of course, can change over time. Sometimes wars change boundaries. Sometimes there might be a dispute that could be solved with war, but it could be solved with negotiations. And sometimes countries purchase land. For the example of the United States bought the area of Alaska for $7.2 million. So that you understand, that is something like $1.37 per acre. It's crazy how much we got for such a very small price. Um, Worked out in our favor though, but we had a very it was a good deal for the United States. So I want to show you how borders can change, how a territory can change through time. And we're going to look at the European continent, and inside of the continent are going to be countries, or excuse me, is going to be territory. Now, when you look at this territory, we're going to start with the Roman Empire. So for around 400 years, border's not going to change. Then after the Roman Empire fell in 500, now all of a sudden the borders are going to change. This is a short video. It's only going to take 45 seconds because it'll go every 100 years. So everybody watch. Just want to stop the video so that you can all see. Look at all of these little itty bitty countries inside of what will become present day Germany. Look at all of those little shapes and all of the different colors. I ask you to really pay attention here because it'll flip to 1900 and you'll see even more colors. And then all of a sudden it'll just turn to one color. So watch here as we finish. Ready? Go. So it kind of gives you an idea of how borders can change. All right, we're going to finish up here. Hold on. All right, thank you for your patience. Here we go. All right, now we get to our next. So, what is a nation? Because we've now talked about states and the four things that must be in place to have a state, but what about a nation? Well, a nation is a term for a group of people with common cultural characteristics. But a nation does not need to be an official state. Now, it sometimes is nice to have a nation that falls within a state because you then have sovereignty, you have independence to make your own decisions, you have your own territory, which is nice. You usually have a government. I'm sorry, you always have a government, right? And you have a population of people. Now, a nation doesn't have to worry about a population. There is tons of people that are within a nation, and they will share cultural characteristics. Now, think back to the cultural unit that we talked about. We're going to be talking about things like the language that you speak, the religions that you observe, the foods that you consume, the clothes that you wear, among other things. So, these cultural characteristics will be within what we call a nation. Now, we live in a state where you may have even heard of this. The Native American tribes that are a part of this land and have been for thousands of years. You may have heard of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. You might have heard of the Menawakan Sioux. So these are also considered nations because they are a group of people with common cultural characteristics. Now, internationally, there are Hmong people, part of the Hmong nation, that would be in areas that we look at today as Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia. So they would be Southeast Asia, just south of China. Also, the Kurds are in an area that we call today Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. Excuse me. So that is also an area. What's the problem, though? Is that here you have this large group of people that want to be independent, that want to be considered a state, but they aren't able to get those four characteristics. One of the biggest problems is they aren't able to get a territory. And with it, you may have, and again, I'm going back to our culture unit, you may have issues like genocides or ethnic cleansings that have occurred in the history of our world. And a lot of that is because that nations have been targeted. Now, a nation state. How nice is this? Well, it's a nation who is a state whose citizens or subjects share common characteristics. Here's what's the thing. If you go to Japan, you will have a cultural group. So they would be a nation. They share cultural characteristics like language and religion, but there's also a border and a government. And obviously, the population's already there, and they have sovereignty. So, what's unique about Japan is that Japan is a nation, they have a cultural group, but they are also a state. They've got those four characteristics that you need in order to be considered a state. So, nation state is a state whose citizens or subjects share common characteristics such as language or descent. So, they could date it back to a small group of people who started a group. So, there's Japan as an example. And then you have what's called a multinational state, multi nations. So think about it, right? You've got groups who share cultural characteristics, but there's a bunch of them inside of a state. Remember, the state has those four characteristics. Don't forget that. So, a state that contains two or more ethnic groups with traditions of self determination. Here's a new term. Self determination is that you wish to form your own allegiance and government. Self determine. You yourself want to determine what happens to you. So, when a nation strives for self determination, they want to be their own independent state. So relationships among nationalities vary in different multinational states. The Soviet Union is the example that we will use because prior to 1991, they were a multinational state. They had 15 different ethnicities. Check this out. Look at all of those. And they struggled to keep these nations living together as one harmonious state. Look at all of the colors, right? Let alone all the different names that you see there, but look at all of the different colors. That was what was the Soviet Union. Now, today, Soviet Union has been disbanded since 1991. And when it disbanded, you had 15 different nations. Yep. And so, just like the number said, all of the different um, uh, national states that were inside of the Soviet Union, they all disbanded. You've probably heard of some of these countries: Ukraine, Belarus, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. You may have even heard of a country called Kazakhstan. If you guys have seen the movie Borat, which just came out, Borat is supposed to portray, excuse me, a person from the country of Kazakhstan. That's not a made up country. Kazakhstan used to be a part of the Soviet Union. They are now an independent nation. So it's in central, kind of the area of Russia, south central area, if you're curious about looking it up. So as we finish, something to keep in mind. Can a area be a nation, but can it also strive to be a state? Let's talk about this. So you have an area called Tibet. Tibet is a territory. It is considered part of East Asia. It borders the Himalayas. In fact, it basically engulfs the Himalayas, and it's the world's highest region. What we mean by that is that when you go into Tibet, you're basically walking through and amongst the Himalayan mountains. Mount Everest borders Tibet and Nepal. So as you look, that's just one mountain within a very large mountain range. So you look here, Nepal and Tibet, Himalayan mountains are right there. So it has territory. Number two, population, absolutely. The Tibetan people are an ethnic group that have had 7.8 million people in the most recent census. Tibetan Buddhists share a primary religion. Sino-Tibetan language is unique to Tibet. It is a unique language, unlike the other languages around it. So Hindu in India and Mandarin or Cantonese in China. It is also a very rich culture. Art, music, festivals, cuisine, architecture are all unique to the region. So they absolutely have a population. We can absolutely consider them a nation because of the different cultural aspects that they share. Government, they absolutely have a government. The Central Tibetan Administration is led by the Dalai Lama. There is the Dalai Lama right there. He is the 14th Dalai Lama. But when you look at a map of Tibet, Tibet sits inside of China. And the country of China says, Tibet, you are never going to get your independence. You're never going to be able to get your own decision-making abilities. Wait, what does it mean to have the ability to make your own decisions? Go ahead and say it out loud. That's right. It's sovereignty. Good job. So why is the Dalai Lama currently in exile? Because he's waiting for Tibet to become an independent nation. Will it ever happen? It's hard to say. But the last piece to remember is that Tibet does not have sovereignty. So the final thing to address is this. The territory of Tibet is administered by the People's Republic of China. Tibet believes it is a distinct nation with a long history of independence. China does not. And so China holds sovereignty over Tibet. They've done it for over 700 years, and they do not have any plans of freeing Tibet and allowing them to become an independent state with all four of the categories. Tibet has three of the four, but not the fourth. And then the Dalai Lama does not seek sovereignty for Tibet, but would accept Tibet as an autonomous region within the People's Republic of China. Just some history to be aware of. The Dalai Lama has actually spoke in Minnesota 3 different times, and he may speak again. So if you ever get the chance to hear him, he would probably be speaking about this last point. But that is kind of a case study when we're looking at, are you a state? Are you a nation? Okay. And so in this case, we would have to say that Tibet is a nation, not a state. All right. That is what you've got. I hope that you've been able to keep pace with me on what we did, but feel free to stop the video or go back and check it out again. Otherwise, thanks for your attention. We'll see you. Bye-bye.